Well, special greetings to all the ladies of charity from Bob and me, and we're delighted to be able to be with you, at least by this form. You know, Vincent de Paul, he founded the Ladies of Charity first, then he founded the Vincentian Fathers and Brothers, and then he founded the Daughters of Charity. But in all three groups, he had certain virtues that he wanted us to impart, not only to others, but to ourselves. And those three are humility, simplicity, and charity. And so we just thought we would spend some time reflecting on those three virtues, humility, simplicity, and charity. All I know on humility is somebody told me a long time ago that there are only two parts to humility. The first one is that every good thing comes from God. Think of that. Everything comes from God. Every good thing comes from God. And all the talents and all the gifts that we have come from God. And, even though there are times when I feel like, well, I did it. I went to school. I got the degrees. I did it. I have to remember that, that gift came from God. And because it comes from God, it is good. But it is to be used for others. The second quality of humility is that I'm a sinner. The humble person has no trouble admitting he or she is a sinner. And the beauty about that is that once you admit you are a sinner, it's pretty easy to forgive each other. If you don't admit you're a sinner, then it's hard to forgive. And that's the one thing. Vincent was really strong on humility. There's a great thing that I read. There's this thing called the World Series of Poker. And these guys, they play Texas Hold'em, and they come from all over the country. And then they have a certain group called Poker Stars. And these guys are always in the finals. Anyway, I can't remember this guy's name, but he won it one year, and they went up and asked him. They said, what's the one quality that you need to have to win this World Series of Poker? Without batting an eye, he said, humility. You have to be humble, or you can't win this. Humble enough to bluff, humble enough to know when to fold, humble enough to know when to do or not to do. So I thought that was interesting, and I think Vincent had that in mind too when he asked us to be humble. So I share this with you, and those are the two things I know about humility, that every good thing comes from God and that I am a sinner.
I was, listening, and I also read some of what Vincent had to say about humility, because it was one of the things that he felt was essential to his whole ministry, especially as he called his priests to be preachers. And he was really concerned about humility. I know some of his quotes. Vincent is quoted as saying, if you don't have humility, you have nothing. And then he also, he had a statement where he said, the poison of charity is pride. And the mainstay that saves it is humility. It seems to me a thankful person is the humble person. And maybe that's the one quality that shows humility. If you're grateful, it starts with God, and so he gets the credit, not the blame. And I think it's because a humble person is grateful for what he has, or for what God has done. And so at the heart of being humble, a person is thankful. And then I started thinking about all the different ways that you can express that. The more grateful you are, the more humble you are. Because then it's not about you. It's about somebody else. It's somebody else that helped you, or somebody did something nice for you. And so I can see where Vincent would say, you know, the poison of charity is pride, because it has nothing to say about somebody else. And charity is all about somebody else. And so the humble person, first of all, to me, is thankful. Grateful for what God has given him, his talents and gifts, things he's able to do. And the humble person who recognizes his mistakes, if you will, the sinfulness that all of us have, because we're human beings and we're weak. And so to be grateful for God's forgiveness is huge for somebody who's humble, because you admit your sinfulness when you're humble. And then you need God's forgiveness. And that's a real issue for so many people. It's hard to forgive. And the humble person can forgive. And also, the humble person seeks forgiveness. Not only from God, but from people that you may have hurt. So I think Vincent really was strong about this virtue of humility. I know the one thing he said in terms of the ministry that Dick and I have in the parish mission apostolate, he didn't want the mission to focus on the preacher. He wanted the mission to focus on the Lord. So Eucharist and reconciliation were huge in his design for a parish mission. And we've kept that going because we really believe when we conduct a parish mission, it's with Eucharist, so that God becomes the focus. God becomes the one who people are looking to. And then that's what Vincent had in mind when he told his men that you got to be humble. So I think being grateful. And then, you know what? I think if people are willing to admit their sinfulness, they're willing to admit their weaknesses. And it's pretty hard to be proud, or I should say overly arrogant and proud, when you know you got weaknesses. And so I really, really respond well to Vincent when he says, you know, without humility, you've got nothing. Because with the humble person has God. The person who is humble is grateful. The person who is humble admits the mistakes that he or she makes. So that's my reflection on the virtue of humility and the need for it.
You know, Jesus, when he never said, why don't you disciples, why don't you learn from me because I'm a good preacher? Or why don't you learn from me because I'm a pretty good teacher? Why don't you learn from me because I know how to deal with the sick? Why don't you learn from me because I'm a good shepherd? Why don't you learn? He never said, learn from me because I'm the great organizer. The only thing he said to learn from him, this is what he said, learn from me because I am meek and humble of heart. I think that's interesting. The one thing he asked us to learn from him is to be humble. So I just have a story that I just want to tell you. This is a really funny story, but it has a great meaning to it. My brother and I were in a parish in St. Louis. I think it was Holy Infant, Baldwin, Missouri. Anyway, we're doing a mission there. And the principal of the grade school, big grade school, her name was Sister Rosario. And she was been there for, God, maybe 40, 50 years. She could have ran for mayor in Baldwin and won. She was so popular. Anyway, she knew how to run a school. Anyway, so we're doing the parish mission, and we go over to visit the classrooms like we do, and we went into the school and visited with her, and she was delighted. And then she said, hey, you know what? Tomorrow's Tuesday. How about you guys coming over to the convent after school? Just to spend time visiting with us in the convent. And Bob and I said, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So Tuesday morning, it starts raining. I mean, it rained in St. Louis. It just rained and rained and rained. It rained so much. I mean, so around the convent, it was just flooded. And it was like a lake around the convent. To the doors, you couldn't get into the doors. So Bob and I, we didn't go. I mean, there was no way we could get to the door. We'd have to wade through water. So we didn't go. So that night at the mission, we're getting vesting for the Mass, and Sister Rosaria comes barging into the sacristy. And I mean, she was not a happy camper. And she said, come here. And so Bob and I just turned, and she said, where were you guys? You were supposed to be there this afternoon after school. You were supposed to come and visit us in the convent. And she was, all of a sudden, Bob turned to her and said, sister, as soon as I can walk on water, I will be there. No, it diffused the situation, but it was funny. But that's kind of a humble remark. I can't walk on water. I can't walk on. Jesus could do. I couldn't walk on water, and if I could, I would have made it. And I think of that story because the one thing Pope Francis scolds us, the clergy and the hierarchy, the one thing he said, you can't be arrogant. You can't be arrogant. You will not be a good leader or a good shepherd if you're arrogant. I think that applies to every minister. When you have that arrogance, then the people you're serving start to feel like they're not as good as you are or as holy as you are. And Francis says, that we're all equal in the eyes of God. So humility is a great virtue. Vincent was great about it. And I just think that our reflection today is that Vincent was right on target when he said, you have to be humble. You have to be humble.
My final thoughts on the virtue is this. I really believe the strength of a humble person comes from the relationship that he or she has with God, and how deep the prayer life is a sign of the humility of a person. Because the deeper your prayer is, the deeper the relationship with God is, the more you're able to say thank you. The quicker it is to be humble, that it's not me, it's God. God's alive in me. And so I really think that at the heart of it, that's the real strength of the humble person, is a deep prayer life. And obviously, being able to say thank you in a very real way, like a Eucharist, to me is the real sign of humility. So anyway, that's our thoughts on humility, and hopefully it helps you appreciate what Vincent thought was really an essential virtue. Because as he said, without it, you got nothing.